connecting to data. Now we'll look at the database connector. The database connector can connect to almost any JDBC compliant relational database, effectively any database engine you have a driver for. This will support operations including select, insert, update, delete, but also doing stored procedures, bulk executes, and working with DDL or data definition language. There's some supported database engines out of the box, such as MySQL, Oracle, and Derby. But if you don't see your database technology in here, have no fear. Things like Microsoft SQL Server and so on can be configured using the generic database configuration. You just need to specify the driver class as one of the connection parameters inside of the configuration. Now let's see if we can get connected to a database. In Walkthrough 3.2, connect to data. We'll add a database endpoint, configure a database connector that connects to a MySQL database. There will also be an optional in-memory database. As we get into this first module, we'll check to see if you have connectivity access to 3306 and provide you with an alternative if you do not. We'll configure the database endpoint to use the database connector, and we'll write our own query to select data from the table in that database. Let's get started. Let's return to Anypoint Studio. Where you previously had a set payload element, let's remove it. In this case, we're going to try to query a database and get actual results from an external system, providing those back to our client. What we'll want to check real quick is that we have the credentials in our student files. Flipping quickly to your student files, again, you'll want to have your student snippets open for this section. Inside of your student snippets, if you scroll down towards Module 3, right at the top, you should see some MySQL database information. We're going to use this in just a moment. Now if we return to Studio, let's add in a database endpoint into our flow. We know this will be in the connector area, and to get a quick search in place, let's just put in database in the search. We'll drag that database into the process area of the flow. Now requests inbound will trigger this database endpoint. If we double-click or select the database endpoint, we should be able to see a connector configuration, similar to what we saw for HTTP. Let's hit Add on the connector configuration, and in this case, we're going to connect to a MySQL server. Let's hit OK. Now, let's take a moment from our student files and copy the different information about host, port, and path and paste them inside. And take a moment to cross-check your credentials. Based on what's in your student files, you're going to have a host, port, user, password, and database in these fields. Now towards the bottom of the configuration, you will see an error stating you need a MySQL driver in order to connect to this specific database. To do this, we'll go ahead and click Add File, which will open up a browser on our computer. From this browser, let's return to the same student files that we were looking at earlier. Inside of student files, you'll have a jars directory. And in that jars directory, along with multiple jars, you'll see a MySQL connector Java 5.0.8 bin jar. This is going to be the driver jar that we want to add to our class path. So let's select this jar and hit open. And now you should see a green check stating that you can see the MySQL server. Now let's go ahead and test the connection. If we click Test Connection, it should pen for a moment and eventually tell you that the test was successful. If the test was successful, everything's looking good and you can continue on with this video. If you were unable to test your connection and you're certain that your credentials are correct based on your student files, it's highly likely that your machine or network is blocking outbound access to port 3306. If that is the case, take a moment to pause this video and head to the next optional video where we describe how to set up the local environment so you don't have to rely on this external database. But again, if your connection is successful, continue on with me now. Now that we've validated the connection, let's hit OK and hit OK to our global configuration. Next, let's go ahead and select an operation. We'll drop down the operation box and choose Select. Scrolling down a little bit in the configuration, we can see an area where we're able to place in a query. Let's do a very basic query here where we ask to select all from and the table name is going to be American. Now we hope to get results back from this, so let's go ahead and apply all changes. And once changes are applied, we can click inside of our canvas and run the project. It may also tell us that something has changed since our last save, and this is good. It's making sure that before we run, it's got everything in place. Let's hit OK to this save, and let the application attempt to start up. Now, similar to our last test, it should attempt to start up, and in the console in the bottom, you should be able to see some logs. Once it starts up successfully, let's see if we can make a request in Postman. Heading back into Postman, we should be at our same endpoint, localhost 8081/flights. Let's go ahead and send another request in. All right, now this time our results look significantly different. We've got a bunch of strange text and characters throughout. Soon, we'll learn why this text is so scrambled and how it's effectively returning a raw representation of the Java object back to us. We'll soon learn how to transform this into a cleaner form. But for now, we're hitting the endpoint, hitting the database. Let's make sure we can stop the application in Studio. Back in Studio, we'll right-click inside of our canvas and stop the project.